Pour yourself a sweet tea, pull up a lawn chair, and turn the page with us. You're listening to Right On Mississippi, a podcast taking you inside the minds of America's most treasured wordsmiths. I'm Ebony Lumumba, and Right On Mississippi is produced in partnership with Mississippi Public Broadcasting for the Mississippi Book Festival, the South's literary lawn party. I am thrilled today about who's sitting in front of me. It is my homegirl, fellow Jacksonian, Mary Miller, author of, amongst other things, Biloxi, her newest novel. Hi, Mary.
Hey, Ebony. How are you?
I'm better now that I get to chat with you for a little while and just be a full-on fangirl and nerd.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
It's good to have you home.
I know. It's nice to be home
right?
for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, once a Jacksonian, always a Jacksonian. We put our claws in you, right? Yeah. No matter if you're born here or not. But you were born here.
I was, yeah. And I'm back for the week just teaching at Millsaps and staying with my parents in the house that I grew up in.
Full circle.
Yes. I'm back home.
That's cool, though. I mean, being back home, you kind of see the city through, I think, a different lens once you go away and you come back. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, it's always good to come home. I still have, I still keep up with my old high school girlfriends, and we go out to dinner.
Which high school?
Jackson Prep.
Okay, I went to Murrah, so I won't hold it against
you. I know. I had a lot of friends at Murrah.
Well, yeah, naturally. I had a lot of friends at Prep, so yeah, that makes sense. That's cool. Well, maybe one day we'll get a book called Jackson, since we've got one called Biloxi.
Yeah, well, Jackson, aren't there Jacksons in like every state? Whereas Biloxi is so
Michigan,
specific.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And that's Tennessee, true. What was the Johnny Cash song?
That's true.
I feel like I never know whether it was Tennessee or Mississippi.
I think I'm just like so arrogant about Jackson being the capital of Mississippi that I just say it and stop before I get to state. And people
it's the one and only.
Jackson where? I'm like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
The Jackson. So you are not only a Jacksonian, but like a quintessential daughter of Mississippi. You attended the University of Southern Mississippi, USM. And you did a fellowship at Ole Miss.
I did. I also got my undergrad at Mississippi State. I got a master's degree at Southern. And
you hit all of the. I mean,
I have.
You teach at the W.
I teach at the W. Yeah. Oh my gosh, so I've hit them all. There's still a few more, but yeah. Everybody in my family, both of my parents and all of my siblings went to Ole Miss, and I said, I'll never go to Ole Miss. I'll never go anywhere near Oxford. And then, I ended up teaching there, and now I live there.
That's cool, though. I did graduate, my graduate degree, my doctorate at Ole Miss. So,
okay.
Yeah, I've got some hotty-totty roots. Yeah, and I know all of the great folks that you've probably worked with during your Grisham writer in residency.
I've got a lot of friends there. It's a nice town.
It's a wonderful department and a great space to write in.
It is a great space to write in.
Yeah, and for inspiration, there's a lot of fodder walking around the square.
I know. Right by my house, every time I walk my dog, we'll go by the cemetery where, Barry Hannah and Faulkner buried. Right. And I pass that every day. And
pour out a little
liquor
for Faulkner.
Usually when I'm walking my dog, I don't have liquor on me.
How is that possible? Are you truly from Mississippi?
Yeah.
So speaking of inspiration, Biloxi is such a fascinating text in terms of like who's telling the story and where the story goes. Completely unexpected, I think, at every turn. But talk to me about your inspiration for this novel, because I mean, it's got some beautiful quirks.
It is quirky. I wrote this novel while I was briefly living on the coast. I was actually living in Gulfport at the time, and it was fall of 2016 and sort of right before the election. And I didn't have a big community down there. I didn't have many friends. I had some relatives and some friends, but I felt a little disconnected from the world around me. And I somehow found this character, Macdonald Jr., who just showed up and wanted to tell this story. And he was also feeling isolated and kind of, removed from the world around him. And I think we had a lot in common in that way.
That's so fascinating. Oftentimes, and I don't know if this is your experience, when I mention to people that I'm from Mississippi, then they start to name like the one thing they know about Mississippi. Yeah. Like, oh, do you know my cousin who lives in Greenwood?
Sure, yeah.
No, I don't. It's like, so Saltillo. I've never been to Saltillo. And so it's interesting that you talk about feeling isolated and, maybe even alone in a different part of Mississippi than you've ever lived in before or you're familiar with. I think it speaks to the state's sort of heterogeneity, right? That we have this vast diversity.
Yeah, it for sure is. I mean, the regions of Mississippi, like the Delta and the coast and, the northern hill country, and they're all very, very different.
Very different.
And even though, I kind of grew up, my mom's sister and her brother live on the coast, and I grew up going down there for Easter and stuff, and I always thought it was a really interesting part of Mississippi because it's so different and also so lovely in a lot of ways. I remember just, sitting in somebody's living room. People would walk in and out. Nobody ever locks their door.
Right.
They were like, who's making the Bloody Marys?
It's like screen doors, too. They're not even like actual doors. It's like you can feel the ocean breeze.
I know. Yeah. It just felt so welcoming and just loved seeing so much water.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, but yeah.
It's still Mississippi. And I love that your book takes place in a space that just tells one of our many different stories about location, right? Like, obviously, you've got your character stories, but it also, I think, in stories that are set in the state, that gives another glimpse into the state's identity.
Yeah, I think about a lot of my friends in Mississippi are writers, and I rarely read something set on the coast. I don't know if
that's true.
Not as frequently, and I do. I enjoyed writing about all.
Jasmine Ward does, probably the most that I've read in like my reading life of narrative set in that part of the state.
Yeah,
and it feels different.
Yeah, it does, and I'm also thinking now. Frederick Barthelme, who taught in Mississippi for many years and started the program at Southern,
right.
He wrote a lot of stuff that was set on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and one of his novels is called Waveland. And I always kind of, I'm sure it's pronounced Waveland and not Waveland.
I don't know.
I'm not even sure. Somebody's going to call.
I'm going to put a Mississippi twang on it. So.
But I always thought, that's a good title. I wish I'd gotten that one first. But yeah.
Biloxi's just, it's just as intriguing because I think there may be something to be said, too, about the Mississippi coast's identity post-Katrina.
Yeah.
Right? And I think some folks came into the realization that, this is part of Mississippi, too. I mean, part of the coast, I think, gets co-opted by Louisiana or, sort of adjoining spaces. But, we kind of were able to reclaim this space through trauma.
Yeah. I think, it's a very different place than it was before. And
naturally,
I remember hearing, growing up just about Camille. Camille.
Right.
I heard about Camille all my life.
All my life. Was that 74? 75?
I feel like it was in the 60s, but I don't even know.
And now all of our social studies teachers are
I know. But
disappointed. But yes, I grew up hearing about Camille as well.
Yeah, and my aunt's house withstood Camille. It's on Highway 90, and after Katrina it was just a slab, and they were just digging through the rubble like so many other families, and didn't rebuild. A lot of people were older who'd lived there forever and chose not to rebuild. And who can blame them?
No,
it's enough.
It's so much to deal with. So you talk about Lewis Macdonald Jr., which the name is even so intricate, right? Like, this is an actual person. This is not a fictional character. Lewis Macdonald Jr. kind of creeping into your mind, or you met him in this time where you felt as isolated as the character is written to be. What were you reading at the time that, and not necessarily influenced his creation, but just what were you reading? What do you remember reading at the time?
I've thought a lot about this, and I go through phases where I'll read just voraciously, or I won't be reading much at all, or I'll be rereading books that I love.
Yes.
And I think was in, some of the books I reread, I just recently reread Donna Tartt's The Secret History.
Nice.
And that was
this
one of...
This says so much about who you are, like what you choose to reread.
I know. And what else? I reread The Moviegoer by Walker Percy a good bit.
Do you really? Mm-hmm. We got to talk about that one, girl. I mean, that is such a haunting, disturbing book for me.
I love that book.
Yeah, and I don't know that I love it, but yeah, I'm fascinated about the servant-employer relationships in The Moviegoer. And so when I read it, I don't know, I have a bit of contempt for it. Well, there's that Percy history in Mississippi, too.
Yeah. And I think when I think about that book and when I read it, it's just so atmospheric.
That's true.
You know, and I mostly get caught up in just New Orleans and walking around New Orleans.
In The Moviegoer.
Yeah.
This is true.
I think, so when I think of it, I can't even, like, at this point recall all of the plot lines. The atmosphere comes to me, I think.
That's so fair, because the Moviegoer is really about like that environment and that neighborhood in New Orleans through that perspective. So no, you're right about that.
And what else do I reread? Let's see. I love Willie Vlaughton, and his favorite of mine is The Motel Life, and it's a really quick read. I like, The Secret History is a commitment, and even rereading it is a huge commitment. But I like a good short novel that, you can read in an afternoon and you
just feel refreshed.
Yeah, and just be absorbed
pick up on
by
things that you miss the first 10 times you read it.
Exactly, like a great movie.
That. Yes. I love that. So we both grew up in the same area, which I just get excited to talk to folks who have that sort of grounding and, perspective. But what did you grow up reading? I mean, naturally, we grew up hearing about Richard Wright and Eudora Welty, Margaret Walker. But who were you reading growing up that sort of stuck with you, that may have even contributed to your writer identity or becoming a writer?
I was not a big reader growing up. I say that, and it's not totally true, but I did not enjoy reading in school much. I feel like...
There we go. And you can still become a writer, kids who are not listening to this podcast.
Well, I feel like... Like Robert Frost, they teach you the same four poems.
Same poems.
Whereas in graduate school, I had to read an entire book of Frost, and I grew to love him. But in high
those
school,
canonical pieces,
you're just reading the same stuff over and over.
This is true.
And it's often like the most sort of inoffensive kind of like,
selective, like this is what you should know about this person's canon when they are such rich, writers and identities, and
so much more complicated.
Oh gosh, yes.
And so I didn't love reading in school. I reread some of those books now and like them so much better.
Like which ones? And we may agree on this.
I'm thinking of like My Antonia and A Separate Piece, and
a separate piece.
But I enjoy them. Know what? I did love that one back then. But like My Antonia, when you're trying to get Mississippi kids to somehow transport themselves to a Nebraska farm or whatever, and I don't remember when it's, but it's I just felt like I couldn't relate to it very much, or things didn't capture my experience, and so I found myself reading like horror novels,
like cultural identity. I didn't relate to many of the texts that are selected for secondary education. Like, there are no characters who look like me, who share a cultural background. And if they do look like me, I mean, they were in these really destitute situations because of our society's, horrific past. And so it was just really hard. I understand that. To really get into those narratives. I mean, I think... find yourself.
Yeah, like Mississippi kids, we just didn't seem to be there. It's like, here's another white Northeasterner.
Where the red fern grows. Get it? I don't relate.
Yeah, and most of the narrators are obviously going to be men.
Yeah.
But anyway, I found myself just reading Stephen King books for the most part. Yeah, alone in my room at night, horrifying myself.
Right, like crying yourself to sleep.
Well, I was so scared of the dark too. I don't know if
that's
if I was scared of the dark before, or like which came first.
Instituted that. I am imagining you like a 12-year-old Mary with a flashlight, like under the covers,
torturing myself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Reading it.
Trial by fire. This is hilarious. So, I'm interested. You mentioned, and I completely agree, that a lot of the texts that we were encouraged to read growing up, and even now when I teach American literature, I find myself having to deviate from what's canonical, but also expose my students to these texts that they're going to have to know, right?
Sure.
To say that they've gotten these degrees in English. But most of the narration, male voices. Mm-hmm. And typically, they're white male voices. And so I'm curious about your choice to voice Lewis Macdonald Jr. in Biloxi. Where does that choice come from? And what's new about kind of how he tells his story?
I feel like I didn't feel like it was a choice. I'd never written anything from a man's perspective before or from a boy's. I just and didn't intend to really. I mean, of course, like I do try to push myself to to explore and to do things other than. But yeah, no, Lewis he just kind of came to me.
I love that he's Lewis. Like, he's your uncle.
Oh, God. I know. Oh, and I think of the Lewises I've known in the past. They're
like
all
reading into this.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I didn't feel like I had much of a choice with him. He came to me and immediately wanted to tell the story. And I thought he was funny.
Which sounds very much like my uncle's, like, sit down.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk now and you're just going to. Yeah. That's fascinating. And I was curious about it and engaging the book, like thinking that this is such an authentic character. And, where is Mary pulling this, these details from and this personality? It's just a fascinating, I think, connection between the author and the protagonist.
Yeah, and I definitely know some people who are similar to Lewis down here, some curmudgeonly old white men,
Curmudgeonly, yes.
Yeah, he's something else, and he gets himself into some situations. But yeah, he I feel like Lewis is very much his own person, but I also, know some Lewises.
Which is fair. When you say we know these curmudgeonly, like, old men, but you still acknowledge his humanity in the way you create his character. That
I hope so.
He's not this monolith.
Yeah, no,
so
I
he
hope
does some unexpected things.
Made him complicated,
no spoiler alerts,
and real. And I mean, I truly really have a lot of compassion and love for him, and think he's important. So funny, and he just entertained me.
Which I think is, the possibility for the reader is that we can feel compassion for someone who is ostensibly completely different from who we are or how we identify. I mean, there's value. That's one of, I think, the valuable aspects to literature.
And he often, doesn't make himself vulnerable or really even worth identifying with. He does a lot of offensive and sort of things and gets himself into trouble. But I also see deeper than, just his actions and his, There's
value there. So I'm thinking about this book, obviously set in our home state, and you've got lots more writing to do, and you've done lots of writing before this. Do you feel as a Southern writer, and I'm thinking now, like I'm drawing on conversations and interviews that I've read about Richard Ford specifically, who kind of prides himself in not being a Southern writer, even though he's from Jackson. He's our homeboy. So I wonder if you feel sort of drawn to writing Southern stories exclusively, if that's important to you, or if you feel that like that's the lane that you abide in.
Yeah, I mean, Richard Ford, he got out early, didn't he?
Relatively, but not as a child,
Yeah, I know he graduated high school with my cousin.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Such a small world.
It is a small world, but, I've only lived in the South, really. I've only lived in Mississippi, basically. I went to the University of Texas for a few years and lived in Austin. Yeah. And, I guess Austin, Texas is its own entity.
Yeah, it's like the Southwest, but it's not,
It's its own thing.
Which don't tell anybody from Texas that.
Well, East Texas is super deep South.
That's true. That's true.
And
it's such a huge state.
It's so big.
It's got compartments of Southern.
It does have compartments. But I think the answer is that when you only know one thing, I don't know. What do I go visit New York for a week and then try to write a story set in New York?
Yeah.
They've got plenty of those,
That's
true.
True.
Plenty of their own writers. No, I think I'll always, and even if I moved away, I think I'd always want to write about home and this place that, that I know and love so well.
Write about home. I really love that phrase. And one of the things I wanted to ask is, and that I've asked other Mississippi writers, perhaps friends of yours, like Kiese Lehman and Angie Thomas, Jessamine Ward, what keeps them here? Because, you guys are really sort of changing the literary game with what you're producing. And you have the opportunities, I'm certain, to be in other places. But what keeps you here?
Yeah, I think, there's, twofold answer. One's practical, like my husband has a good job here.
Nice. Yeah. We've got to pay the bills.
But yeah, I think so many of us have really made a real choice to stay here and to live here. And it's certainly a choice. Yeah. I always thought, I'll go back to Austin. I'll kind of, do this Grisham writer in residence in Oxford and then go back there. And that's where I'll be. But there's something that just pulls you back here. There's something that keeps pulling me back here. And yeah, I used to say I wanted to escape, but I keep getting sucked back. And now at this point, it certainly is. It's, I have agency. I could leave if I wanted to. But no, we choose to stay. And I'm so happy that so many others are choosing to stay.
I agree.
And I do think it means a lot. I used to think, what's it matter if I just live here? I'm not volunteering at all these places and making my community as strong as it could be. And I thought of all the things I wasn't doing. But I think there's still a lot of value in being like, no, this is our home and this is where we're going to, this is where we live. And
this is where we choose to be and to grow. I agree.
Yeah.
And you producing work out of this space. Not only that, but you're teaching. And so, you kind of characterize it as, I'm not participating in these community organizations, but I think being from a space and then making the choice to, and this is not a shameless plug for my own career, but making a choice to be an educator in the space that sort of formed you, I think adds value to how you can communicate with your pupils. It's a different message.
That's, yeah, I guess I didn't really think about that. And I think because the W is, it's a low-res MFA. So, a lot of the students are from here, but a lot of them are from everywhere. And I don't go to campus that often, so I feel some disconnect there. But thank you for saying so, because I do feel like,
to think about, I think maybe every 3 semesters or so, I encounter a student who finds out I'm from Mississippi and finds out not only am I from Mississippi, but I grew up in Jackson. And they're like, really? And you're back here. Why? And so we get to have this drawn out conversation about choice for where you will sort of kind of forge your footprint. For
also the food is great in Jackson.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
One of my favorite things about coming home. They say the food's good in Oxford, and I'm like, no. Jackson's much better.
I agree. And there's nothing against Oxford, so don't come after me, people. But, I think there's more variety here.
There's certainly a lot more variety.
And Oxford's growing, but, there's a Jackson culinary community that is out of sight.
It really is.
Mm-hmm. In every sort of genre of food, too. When people hear me say, the food where I live is amazing, they are automatically thinking, like, deep fried, everything, and grits, which, hey, the grits and the deep fried goodness are amazing. But, there are all sorts of international communities that are producing food here. And there's this vegan movement here, which I don't
love
think
vegetarian and vegan food.
Yeah, who'd have thunk it?
Yeah.
that would be thriving.
Sorry, it's lunchtime, and so I got a little distracted.
I'm starving. We're really hungry. I don't know if you guys can tell, but we're in a great place to be hungry.
We are.
Yeah. No worries there. We'll figure it out. And speaking of that, though, what are the things that you need to produce that are specific to home? So is there a certain drink? Are there certain dishes? Where do you write? What's the setup for you producing a masterpiece like that?
Oh, gosh.
A masterful piece like Biloxi.
Oh, gosh. I wish I worked harder and was a daily writer. I'm not. I'm more of a binge writer who just works on her couch.
You're just like bucking the system off again. Like, I didn't like reading growing up.
Yeah.
I'm not a disciplined writer, and I'm so
really
successful.
not disciplined. I guess what it mostly takes is I work from home, so my dog stares at me all day. Just
pressure.
Like, what are you going to do for me? When are we going out? Can I get a bone?
What's up? Do something important.
So yeah, you need like a hungry mutt staring at you.
Okay, write it down, guys. Get a dog and starve it.
But it is a great way to take breaks, when you're writing or you're working hard.
My children do that for me.
Yes.
Yeah, they're just like, Mommy, lunch.
You have constant, distraction.
And they don't care what I need to get done. Yeah, at all.
They're so cute.
Thank you. My best work yet. Time will tell. So I often ask our Mississippi writers on this program to describe what the state means to them. And you mentioned when you started out creating Macdonald Jr. and writing Biloxi that it was close to the national election, which sort of has shifted folks' thinking and understanding about this national space that we inhabit, for better or for worse. So, and I think that it has affected Mississippi's identity as well, in the way that people conceptualize our state. So I'd like to ask Mississippi writers specifically what the state is to them, what the state means to you.
Gosh, I feel like it's almost so broad. I should have listened to this last question and see how everyone else answered it.
The answers go all over the place.
What it means to me. I think, it's hard to even say because it's everything to me, Which
I think was someone else's answer. That's amazing.
But yeah, like I said, I'm staying with my parents this week in the house that I've lived in since I was 9 months old.
That's
a lot of our neighbors, there's still some of the neighbors there, and then some of their children have moved into the neighborhood as well.
That something?
Yeah, and it all just feels like, things change, and yet,
like different and organic, is it kind of?
Well, things change, but they don't ever change too much, or it's a very slow change in Mississippi. Like I said, some neighbors, have moved away or died, and then their kids come to live in the neighborhood. You're like, oh, that's still so-and-so, or, I don't know. It's just, I still have friends that I see from when we were 6 years old and stuff. And I
love it. It's sort of how I think of our state, because I moved away for about 10 years and I came back. And so whenever and I still live in the vicinity of where I grew up, my husband and I, whenever I pass something that changes, like a store that's not there or someone's house changes color, I'm like jarred. What's going on here? Did you get permission? What are we going to do?
That house should always be blue.
Exactly. That's just its natural color. So there's that. But then we have this, I think, consistent hopefulness for progress.
Yes. And
certainly in Jackson.
Yes. All I can say to that is yes. Gosh, I hope for this state so much. Yeah. And yesterday I took my high school students that I'm teaching this week, and we went to the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. Fantastic. And I hadn't been before, and it's amazingly well done.
It's a remarkable space.
And we spent several hours there and just all sort of walked around by ourselves and took it in. And I thought, I don't know, just to have, all of these, to have that museum that is huge. And I think, we kind of downplay things don't, they change so slowly or they don't change at all. And, but you see progress everywhere. Yeah. And
I think change is gradual.
Yeah.
Like substantive, long-lasting change, it's going to be gradual.
Yeah. And I don't know. All we can do is try to have the hard conversations sometimes and try to keep looking ahead and moving ahead. And
And I guess my hope, my prayer is that we're always willing to do that. And I see, like, our writers, your role being so integral to grasping on to that, to embodying this eternal sort of hopefulness and being open to the shifts and movements that are necessary for us to be just a more positive society and environment as a state.
Yeah.
Right. So no pressure, but we're counting on you.
Well, it's nice to hear that writers make a difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we put our claws in you, so you can move wherever you want. But
I think mostly,
you will always belong to us.
Writers just sit around in their pajamas, like, nice. 2 days unshowered and type on their laptop. So we don't always think about,
Again, you are shattering all of the, like, romanticized visions we have of writers.
Think that is kind of romantic.
That's true.
I mean, doesn't everyone
it's my ideal day.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Weekend.
It's pretty nice.
It's lovely. I think we all, especially my students and probably yours as well, think that they are, like, below the bar of producing sound writing because they are in their pajamas, unshowered for 2 days, like eating ramen and throwing some at the dog too. But it's like some of your favorite writers were so undisciplined.
Well, and you hope too, when you're writing something, you never really know if it'll work out. You never really know what the end result will be. If it will be published, if it will be, something else you put in the drawer. And so it's always kind of a risk.
And that's ongoing. I mean, there's still writers who have long been gone. And their works are now, their unpublished manuscripts are now being drawn out and published. So,
oh gosh, I don't want that to happen to me.
Just you wait.
No, I'm going to break my laptop when I leave.
It's all in the cloud. We're going to see it. Mary, thank you so much for coming home.
Thank you.
And chatting with me for a little bit. And we know you're always around, and we want to thank you for that. And if you haven't checked it out, check out Biloxi and some of Mary's other titles. They're remarkable and a true representation of the literary genius that is homegrown right here in Mississippi. We want to thank Mary Miller for joining us today. Be sure to visit your local bookstore to purchase her works and keep up with her online. Right On Mississippi is produced in partnership with Mississippi Public Broadcasting for the Mississippi Book Festival, the South's literary lawn party.